How do you build a small, historic American downtown in Cities Skylines 2? In this episode, we will review 13 easy design principles to implement and help you achieve gorgeous small-town city centers. The problem is that we don't have just one zone category for small downtowns. Instead, we have several zones spread across North American and European themes, including commercial, office, and mixed use. I will show you how to use these zones and the 13 principles to help you navigate this problem. I hope you will share your design principles in the comments as we go along. Let's return to the town square of Sunrise Channel, the very first community we built in Marathon Cove. What we originally built does not look like a small historic downtown. Rather, it's kind of an incoherent mess. So let's dive in with design principle number 1, which is to align your storefronts. In our original build, the store entrances were located at various depths. While you will see this in American shopping strips, it is not what you typically see in a small historic town square. Instead, the building facades should all align right at the edge of the sidewalk, as we have done here. Design principle number 2 is to keep buildings in the 2 to 4 story range. Small American downtowns will typically be 2 stories, sometimes 3. Going up to 4 stories is okay if the buildings don't look out of place. Just remember, going up floors is costly, so be sure you are judicious with how many of these taller buildings you add. And now, here is a secret. Because we are limited with assets of this size, I sometimes give myself permission to use assets in the 5 or 6 story range. I will show you how to do this. Design principle number 3 is to place parking behind the buildings whenever possible. In our original build, we had parking lots that spanned the entire block, from the front near the train station all the way to the back. This is uncommon for a small historic town center, which typically has wall-to-wall buildings on its main street. A parking lot is often behind the buildings or a block or 2 away. When a parking lot has been added in, it is often because a building was torn down. This brings us to design principle number 4. There should not be small individual parking lots with buildings, as we see here with these assets. Historic buildings would have been built before the automobile. It is a modern convention for each building to have its own parking lot. You will find that set up in modern construction along shopping strips, but not in the historic centers of small cities. You don't need small private lots for each building. That said, I don't want to suggest that your small city centers must be entirely historic. Design principle number 5 is to mix historic with modern assets. While the historic cores of small American city centers were probably built in the late 1800s or early 1900s, these places are not frozen in time. Some buildings fall into disrepair and will be torn down by the city, leaving empty lots for parks or parking, or creating opportunities for modern replacements. You might have modern infill created during the 60s or 70s, which noticeably stands out. Other buildings could have been built recently using a contemporary style. And of course, the needs of cities change over time. Adding a small corner gas station like we did is not unusual because the residents and workers need gas. Modern needs will replace unused buildings. The point is that you should aim to follow the design principles, but also give yourself permission to break the principles based on your town's story. Design principle number 6 is to detail your small spaces. We have filled in plants, flowers, trees, and surfaces into all the empty nooks and crannies. Your downtown core is a destination and a draw for visitors. You want to make sure it reflects the care of the community. We will now move to the other side of this central area and repeat our first 6 principles. We will remove the mismatched low-rise buildings in the various parking lots to create space for our historic and modern structures. Right from the start, we will break design principle number 4 by keeping our small post office with its own small parking lot. I don't love this, but we have limited post office assets, and certainly nothing that fits the design needs of a historic city center. Plus, I like the idea of keeping the post office right in the core. In our town story, we can suppose that the historic building on this lot was torn down, and the post office with its own parking lot was filled in. Indeed, this town square has several modern buildings, including some with lower profiles towards the back. Perhaps many of the early structures just didn't survive, and maybe the city was not interested in spending the money to preserve them. However, the town cares about its landscaping and attracting tourists to the center. Design principle number 7 is to detail the sidewalks. Using Anarchy, we will place tree grades and palm trees. Street landscaping helps complete our historic core. We can then move to the other side across from the train station. We will replace the low-profile buildings with 2 to 4-story assets, aligning all the facades. None of these buildings will have their own parking lots. Mixing historic with modern assets is easy as we fill things in, alternating the mixed-use zones with commercial and office zones. It is okay that not all of these are wall-to-wall assets, as it adds diversity. Let's update our town square by installing a historic brick surface around the fountain and changing the plants to palm trees, which is appropriate for our Southern California theme. What we have now looks much better and more historic, even with the mixed-in modern assets. Even in California, which can seem so new, a little bit of history can create something very special. Our first 7 design principles helped us update Sunrise Channel, but I think it's time to start a new town for the next 6 principles. I have been thinking a lot about small and medium-sized American towns that I love for inspiration. Towns like Great Barrington in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, Bentonville, Arkansas, located on the edge of the Ozarks, Galena, Illinois, well known for its beautifully preserved historic center. If you have a favorite small town, please share it in the comments and give this video a like. Like the rest of Marathon Cove, we will continue our train network with a station right at the center. I think the station from the French Asset Pack is perfect, particularly since we are so close to the San Carlos wine region and the station looks historic. Let's clean up our rail line to make way for the new town. We will then clear some space for the town by flattening a few hills. The center of this town will be a wide boulevard, serving as our main collector and curving out to the San Carlos wine region. This town will be a major tourist spot for visitors to stay when they are coming out for wine tours. The core of our historic center will be the train station and a large town square. We will build a small grid to match the square, radiating out from the station and surrounding the avenue. Since this avenue is our collector, we will limit the number of intersections along it. We will also use contextual design, adapting the grid as it bumps up against the hills. This should give us a good starting point to build our historic core and work on our remaining design principles. I think we will have a lot of fun here, crafting a classic American small town center. Let's call this new town Verano, a perfect name for a small town in Southern California. Before we start on the city center, Verano will need some residents. I'm so excited to try out the UK Asset Pack. Although based in the UK, many of these small detached residences work quite well in a North American context. As we go along, we can add assets from our other properties like the European and North American waterfront zones. This will help us create an eclectic style. Verano is a little different from our other neighborhoods near the water. We are really going to pack in the houses. This mostly old historic community is more economically diverse than our beachfront towns. Right now, the only way into Verano is the San Carlos Scenic Byway, so we should create another entrance route directly from our highway. We will take a secondary avenue, an arterial, up through the hills to build a direct interchange. We should keep the grade gentle so cars and trucks won't have to drive up something too steep. In the next episode, more work must be done to settle residents into the hills and clean up the cliff walls. This will be a simple Trumpet interchange, taking us much closer to the energy corridor for folks who work out that direction. We will build the Trumpet right into the side of the hill. Our goal here is to smooth out the terrain and make it appear that the interchange fits in naturally without disrupting the landscape. Just getting this up and functional for today's purpose will be sufficient. However, I don't love all the elevated portions. What do you think? Should we raise the land on each side of the ramps or leave it elevated with the retaining walls? Let me know what you would do in the comments. Once the land is smoothed, we can take the final steps of connecting our high-energy power lines. We can now return to filling in the residential grid and building the community that will support our historic American town center. Once we get these filled in, we can review our last design principles. I am placing each building one at a time to have a nice mix of assets and avoid any that would look out of place in a North American context. To keep these new residents satisfied, let's make sure we have a police station, a clinic, a fire station, and a post office. Although we haven't really started on the historic center, having these services in place will help satisfy our new residents. I think the UK detached houses are just stunning. As we get closer to the center, we can switch from the detached to the semi-detached. It shouldn't be surprising to see duplexes closer to downtown. It will also be beneficial as we have a strong demand for medium-density residential zones. The duplexes are beautiful and something the game has really needed. By including some duplexes, we further highlight the economic range of Verano. We should also think carefully about how we will place homes the closer we get to the collector and the arterial. For this community, we prefer to keep homes off the main road and away from noisy intersections as much as possible. One of the great things about these UK assets is the natural grass showing through, rather than a manicured grass lawn. I think that keeps this community looking a bit more natural. It also makes the random homes we place from other zone types stand out more. Although placing each house individually can be tedious, I like this approach because it gives us the greatest variety of homes. Each one has a different lot width and depth, and we have the different zones mixed in with the UK assets. This is truly a unique community. Now that we are getting close to the collector, let's place our homes at a distance so they don't have the noise of the busy road. This will leave us a nice gap that we can fill in with trees and bushes. We can then take our pedestrian path and create walkways through the trees, almost like a park area. These paths also create shortcuts for our citizens to walk downtown and for commuters to the train station. We should probably upgrade another stretch of our collector to 4 lanes, since this will be a high-traffic area and it connects to the arterial. We can then fill in the remaining open areas with pathways and a few remaining houses. All the other open spaces can be filled with trees and bushes, which gives this community some lovely trails and parkland. At long last, we will get started on our historic core. Design principle number 8 is flat roofs are best. When you look at a classic small American downtown, Main Street buildings tend to have flat roofs. It's okay to have a variety, but flat will give you a historic American look. Design principle number 9 is to mix regional zones and assets. Just as we mix the UK detached assets with other zone types for the residential area, we should do the same thing in our historic downtown. Remember, we do not have one zone type that gives us all of our needs. Instead, we will draw from many different themes and asset packs. By finding a variety from UK, North American, European, and even an occasional building from German or French packs, we can create a blended American eclectic style. Design principle number 10 is to scale the downtown appropriately for your city. This means that the size of your historic center should be proportionate to the rest of your town. It can be tempting to build many big buildings, and indeed, we are using a few here in the 5 or 6 story range, but we will do so very sparingly. You don't want a bunch of extra tall buildings in your historic center. But scaling the downtown is not just about height. It is also about the total footprint or land area that is covered. You should consider the total number of blocks you have for commercial and office use, and how that area's size compares to the rest of your residences. Design principle number 11 is to plan for a transition from the downtown to your residential areas. I like to describe these as zones of transition. You should not put a 5 or 6 story building next to a single-story detached house. How does your downtown transition from the historic core outwards to the residential neighborhoods? Some of this can be done simply by tapering down the height of your buildings. It is possible that your town has zoning laws that prohibit a certain amount of commercial or office height next to low-density residential. Your zones of transition help make sense of these spaces. Design principle number 12 is to include tourist attractions. We just popped down a motel at this corner. Small historic American downtowns will often have a motel or hotel. That is a good starting point as it gives tourists a place to stay. But why are tourists there in the first place? Including small parks can be helpful. The UK Asset Pack also offers some great pubs, which we will suppose are the downtown tasting rooms for the San Carlos wineries. Our central square is also a large tourist attraction. I wish there were a way to make our vineyards truly a tourist draw, because we might attract more people to stay here. Standing back, we can see that Verano Center is attractive to a medium degree, but I think we can increase it much more. We will fill this additional block at the end using as many flat-roofed buildings as possible. We will try to keep things in the 2 to 4 story range, but allow a few up to 6 stories. We will also make sure we have a nice mix of modern and historic looking assets. And following design principle number 11, we will pay attention to our zone of transition as the square bumps into a residential block. Our historic core is filling in quite nicely, but we can do more. We have kept parking lots behind buildings, but a few can be reduced slightly to accommodate more storefronts. This is done easily through the Move It mod, and then adjusting the underlying surface. I love the way the cars start using these lots. Adjusting this lot allows us to add another building and create a small pedestrian alley from the parking lot to the main street. We now have just over 1,000 residents in Verano. Let's go ahead and increase our attractiveness level, adding in one of the UK signature buildings. We can then fill in this block. When mixing assets from different themes, you have to be prepared to use Move It to align the storefronts. That takes us back to design principle number 1. Let's add a few German asset pack buildings for our town's diversity. Remember, the design principles are a guide, but it's okay to break them. Reviewing our telecom coverage, we can see that Verano is not fully covered. I think the best place for it will be in the hills between Verano and the Energy Corridor. This places the tower near our industrial area, far enough away from the community, but close enough that it still provides coverage. With that complete, let's continue to increase our tourist attractions by building a large custom park. We have this open area near downtown where we place the UK church and cemetery. The church is not my favorite for this town. While it does look historic, I have a harder time justifying it for our small North American community. But for now, we will make it work. We will just focus on building this large park. We need lots of trails that twist their way in and around, creating shortcuts for pedestrians and making the park walkable. I am so glad we preserved this little hill, as it is a great natural feature for a park. The plaza, the dog park, and the playgrounds will all combine into a beautiful and attractive area, connected by the pathways. We will also build a circular trail to the top of the hill. We are now ready to fill things in with trees. I was going to keep the cemetery in its smaller state, but after seeing the park filled in, let's give it both upgrades. We can fix the paths that overlap the cemetery, and then I think this little custom park is more or less finished, upgrading the attractiveness of our town considerably. Design principle number 13 is to enhance street parking using custom parking streets. The default street parking is parallel, but you will often find angled street parking in small historic downtowns. You can do this in Cities Skylines 2 with the Road Builder mod. We will add the 60-degree angled parking for Verano, which looks very appropriate in a small downtown area. But it is never a good idea to have parking right up against an intersection. To avoid this, we will create a transition segment, making a pinch point at the intersections to slow traffic down and keep parking safely back. To make these transition segments the right width, we need to add an empty lane and widen the sidewalks. We will then go around and add the pinch points to each intersection, making them safe for cars and pedestrians. A few trees and flowers on our collector are an inviting welcome for out-of-town guests. What do you think of this downtown and our 13 design principles? I am sure I missed lots of other ideas and tips. I'm always looking for new ideas, so please share them with me in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on better ways to create a small historic American downtown. All feedback is welcome. While you're at it, please give the video a like and subscribe for future updates. And if you enjoyed this, I have other content for you to watch.